You're listening to Little Green Cheese, episode 46. Well, welcome back. I'm Gavin Weber, and this podcast is where you can learn about cheese making at home. Well, today's topic, we're going to be talking about acid coagulated cheeses. Now, I remember when I first started cheese making way back when, in about 2009, I was rather confused about the whole procedure for acid coagulated cheese. I do remember when I was a kid that my mum, I think she accidentally made some acid coagulated cheese in the form of ricotta. She boiled up some milk, and which seemed to be a regular thing. I think my dad used to like warm milk on his porridge, and then accidentally, and I don't know how, the milk curdled for some reason. Now, it could have been because we used raw milk back on the dairy farm that I grew up on, and basically I do remember that they just threw it away. So now that I know better, what they could have done is simply drained it through a tea towel, a clean tea towel, and they would have had, well, a form of acid coagulated cheese. Not sure what that one would have been called, but it probably would have been pretty close to Paneer. So let me just go through. There's three cheeses I want to cover in this episode, in this part of the episode. The first one is Paneer, and the second one is ricotta, and the third one is Ricotta Salata. Now, all three cheeses are acid coagulated cheeses. They're very basic. And there are subtle differences, and it's very, all cheeses have a subtle difference to them, or they wouldn't be different, obviously. But there's those subtle differences that change the flavour, change the texture of the cheese. So I managed to get a hold of a recipe, an authentic Indian paneer recipe, not one of those ones from those cheese books that you're not quite sure where they come from. So this one's from a friend, a work colleague, and her name is Neha. Now, Neha got me this paneer recipe. So this makes about 250 to 300 grams of paneer. So basically what you need is 1 litre of full cream milk, preferably unhomogenised. You need 500 mils or 3 to 4 tablespoons of full-fat dahi. Now, dahi is basically yogurt. So it's a form of Indian yogurt. You can use a plain natural yogurt. I wouldn't go so far as using a Greek yogurt because it's a bit sour. And you can also use, you also use 5 to 7 teaspoons of lemon juice. So lemon juice is the acid, as well as a little bit of the yogurt to form the coagulation process. So basically what you do with paneer is you bring the milk to the boil, and then once it's at the boil, you take it down to a simmer. Don't forget to stir it all the time or you're going to burn the milk on the bottom. And then you add in the lemon juice and the yogurt, and you'll see it start to curdle. Once it's curdled, you'll see that it splits into curds and whey, and the whey should be clear. So it should be a clear liquid, not a cloudy liquid. So you keep stirring the milk for about 5 minutes while it's simmering still to avoid it from sticking to the pan. And then during this time, the cheese starts to get thicker. The curds start to stick together. So after that 5 minutes, then you strain it through some butter muslin. So not a loose weave cheesecloth. You need the butter muslin, which is a form of it's a tight weave cotton cloth. So, and then because if you don't, you're going to lose most of the cheese straight through the loose weave holes. You basically let that drain for about 5 minutes, just in the colander, and then you flatten the cheese. You put a heavy weight on top. So around about, doesn't really say in the recipe, but I have given it a go, and it's about 2.5 kilos. So what I do, very similar to the way I press Stilton cheese. I know it's way out there, but Stilton, I put it on, so I put the bag of cheese on top of a wooden board, and then I put another wooden board on top of that, and then I put a filled 2 litre milk carton filled with water, so that's 2 kilos, and that presses. So I press for between 45 minutes and an hour, and then the cheese firms up as it cools down as well. And then you have your paneer. So then you can cut it into cubes, and you can use it in such recipes as paneer and chickpeas. I can't remember the official Indian name of that. Or there's a spinach dish which is called palak paneer, and that tastes amazing. That's it's a spinach with spices, and it's blended into a paste, a thick a gravy type thing, and there's cubes of paneer put into it, and it tastes amazing. So with paneer, the coagulant is lemon juice and yogurt, or it can be either or. If you use just yogurt, then you're going to get a softer cheese. If you use lemon juice, you get a little bit of a firmer cheese. If you use both, it's a bit in the middle. So I used both, and it worked out really well. So the coagulant, as I said, is lemon juice. So now on to ricotta. Now there's a couple of ways to make ricotta. There is whey ricotta, so made from leftover whey from semi-hard and hard cheeses. Or there's whole milk ricotta. And whole milk ricotta is made, as the name says, from whole milk, and you get a much higher yield. But those two different types of ricotta have two different processes. So with the whey ricotta, you need about, I would say, 6 litres is what I've used, and that's usually what I have left over from my cheese making efforts. And basically all you do is you heat it up to about 93 degrees Celsius. Heat the whey up, make sure you're stirring it. So this is direct heat. You don't need to use a double boiler or anything like that. Just make sure you're stirring it. So whilst you're stirring the whey, then add about 1/4 cup of cider vinegar. Now I find cider vinegar is a little bit more acidic than white distilled vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is fantastic. And you'll notice that straight away it'll split, and you'll see small white particles of the leftover protein, and you'll see that the whey starts to clear, especially if you've got a cloudy whey to start with. And then use butter muslin again. Allow that to drain. Drain it for about an hour. That's usually what I do. And then you add a little bit of salt to it. And basically you've got your ricotta. So that's pretty basic. That makes a little bit of a firmer ricotta. It has a fairly low yield. You'll be lucky out of 6 litres to get about 250 grams of ricotta. Not very much at all, but it's better than throwing it down the sink. And the leftover whey is fairly clear, so you can use that. You can refrigerate that, use it as protein drinks, use it in smoothies, use it in baking, that sort of stuff. So don't let it go to waste. Now, the second type of ricotta is whole milk ricotta. Now, if you tend to use vinegar with whole milk as the coagulant, you'll find it goes very rubbery. So what I prefer to do is to use citric acid. I use citric acid in my classes, and I find that it makes a very soft ricotta, a very smooth, and you can use it in baking. You can make it in tarts and stuff like that. Use it for cooking. So basically you heat the milk up so this is whole milk. I use about 4 litres for this recipe. You get a fairly good yield. And I use a teaspoon and a half of citric acid, and I dilute that in a 1/2 cup of water and make sure that's thoroughly dissolved. So you get a fairly acidic solution there. So I I heat the milk to about between 85 and 90 degrees Celsius, and then I pour in about half of that citric acid water mixture. So about half, and I see if it then splits. If it needs a little bit more citric acid, then I'll add a little bit more. So then what I do, I turn off the heat straight away after it's split, and there's no more milky whey. It's got to go clear, yellow clear, and then I leave it for about 10 minutes. Now, leaving this for 10 minutes is where it bulks up and starts to join together. You have to leave it sitting undisturbed for the 10 minutes. This is where the magic happens. And then basically you pour it into a butter muslin lined colander, and you let that drain. And what you can do to speed up the process a little bit is to then tie it up, tie the corners up and tie it into a bag, and then hang that over a pot for about 30 minutes until It's the desired consistency. It's not too runny. It's not too hard. So you will have to check it. Sometimes I've seen ricottas that I've made, whole milk ricottas, have to drain for about an hour in some instances. But so check it to see it's the consistency. Now, sometimes if you've over-acidified it, then it may be a little bit rubbery. So I tend to add about a tablespoon or two of just cream, and then put a little bit of salt in, only probably half a teaspoon tops, just to enhance the flavour a little bit. There's not much flavour in ricotta anyway, and that's what I do. So and then I store that just in a container in the fridge for about a week or two. After about 2 weeks, it starts to go mouldy, so make sure you use it before then. So that brings us on to Ricotta Salata, which is very simple. So use the whole milk recipe for ricotta that I just mentioned, and basically you remove the ricotta from the bag after you've drained it, and then you salt it. So put a tablespoon of salt in for and makes it quite salty, and then because ricotta salata is a very salty cheese. So then you press it, and you can put it into a ricotta mould, which is basically a fairly big basket. I tend to make sure that that's lined with just cheesecloth, because I find that some of the stuff escapes through the basket. So you can line it with a cheesecloth and basically put on top, just put a plate or a follower on top of it. You fold over the cloth, put the follower on top. It can be a saucer, something as simple as that, flat bottom saucer, and put about a kilogram of weight on it. I use a litre milk carton full of water on top, and press that for about an hour, and then unmold it, turn it over, and press for about another 12 hours. And this will make your cheese into a solid form, which is what you want. And then unmold it. Then I usually just rub it with a bit of salt, and then I find that the salt seeps in and helps preserve the cheese. So then you can put it in a container and refrigerate it. But what you can do, you can actually age it for a little bit longer than that. So just make sure that you put it into your cheese fridge. I usually tend to put it in about 13 degrees Celsius, and I turn it over every day, and I rub it with a little bit of salt, just a tiny amount, just about a tablespoon. Just rub it all over the cheese, and you'll find that the rind starts to dry out, which is great. And you'll find it has a fairly good structure. It's fairly solid structure when it's finished. So you can age it between 2 and 4 weeks. Not a lot of flavour, but it's a nice salty cheese. You can slice it, and you can put it on a cracker. So they're the main types of acid coagulated cheese. So very basic. You can make them at home, no problems at all. I would say just about every person who has a decently stocked pantry would have apple cider vinegar, they would have lemon juice, they would have, well, maybe not citric acid, but it's easy enough to pick up from the supermarket shelf, and basically milk and salt. They're the main ingredients for these acid coagulated cheeses. Very simple to do, and I hope that's helped shed a little bit of light on some of the most simplest cheeses to make in the cheesemakers' repertoire. So we've got some interesting news this week. It's around a Listeria contamination around a cheese that is distributed by Whole Foods. And Whole Foods is a big organic food retailer in the US. I'm not sure we've got Whole Foods here in Australia, but what's happened is that a cheese by the name of the Papillon Organic Roquefort, which is a blue cheese, and you can identify it. It has a code of PLU 029536 for all you American listeners. If you bought it from Whole Foods, then take it back. Now, what they found was they decided to recall the cheese after a routine sampling conducted by the FDA, what's that, Food and Drugs Administration, and they found Listeria monocytogenes, which is a bacteria that is not very nice. Now, this bacteria, what it can do is it can threaten the lives of young children elderly and adults who have a weak immune system. Even though it's rare that adults with a strong immune system can be affected if the bacteria starts to overtake their immune system. So one of the worst things is that it can affect unborn babies. Pregnant women can suffer from, it's a disease called listeriosis, which can include headaches, fever, fatigue, and can affect the unborn baby, which is not very good. So normal symptoms for people with weak immune systems can include loss of coordination, convulsions, confusion, fever, neck stiffness, headaches, and body aches. It can be treated with antibiotics. So if you have eaten some of this cheese, please whip yourself off to your doctor and get treated. So listeria can multiply in cheese if equipment's not sanitized properly, and it can be passed on from the animals. Also, make sure that the herd's clean. You don't have any control of that. You've just got to make sure that the milk that you're using. And unfortunately, unpasteurized cheeses are quite susceptible to harboring Listeria bacteria. So when in doubt, pasteurize your milk, or make sure if you get raw milk, you get it from clean animals and process the cheese straight away, and make sure that you are only making high temperature cheeses out of your raw milk. So that's unfortunate. That actually happened on the 7th of October. I'm going to air here on the 14th of October 2015. So so make sure that you haven't any of that cheese in your fridge. That's the Papillon Organic Roquefort. So the safest thing to do is to make it yourself, make your own cheese at home, and make it from pasteurized milk. And you won't have any issues with Listeria. So unfortunately, that does happen in the commercial world, as well as, I suppose, home cheesemakers who don't take care with their sanitisation and pasteurisation of their milk. That's not to say that I haven't made raw milk cheese myself. I certainly have, and I've made sure that I've made appropriate cheeses with that milk, and that I follow the right sanitation processes, cleaning all of my equipment and cleaning my hands and cleaning everything and making sure the cheese fridge was squeaky clean before I put that raw milk cheese in there to mature. So we're on to the question section of the show. This first one is from Charlotte, and Charlotte's from South Africa. Charlotte said, I notice that you don't test the pH of the cheese at all. Why not? Well, good question. I find that testing the pH of the cheese it's not cumbersome. You can use litmus paper, or you can buy a pH meter. I find if I follow the recipe to the letter, and I'm kind of like that. That's just my personality. I will follow the recipe to the letter. Make sure that I don't, leave the milk longer than 45 minutes if it says 45 minutes for culturing before I add the rennet. Those recipes usually are fairly spot on. I've managed to replicate the same cheese with the same flavour over and over again, especially with some of the cheeses that I make all the time, like Caerphilly and Parmesan or Romano. I have no problems. So basically that's why I don't test the pH of the cheese, because if I stick to a tried and true recipe, then it turns out the same, which is fantastic. So that's why in my cheese making book I haven't got any mentions of pH. And you look at most of the cheese books that are out there for the home market, and rarely do they have any indication of what the pH level should be at every step. Look, if you're trying to make something that's a unique creation and you want to be able to replicate it again yourself, then yeah, sure, test all the pH or the potential hydrogen, that's what pH stands for, of the liquid as you go along at different stages to make sure that you can hit it, get it on the money every single time you make the cheese. Now, Charlotte also goes on to mention that she bought my book and loves it. She goes on to say, thank you for making it so easy. I live in South Africa and my cheese supplier here makes the recipe so complicated that I lost my calm altogether and made so many mistakes. They also have a culture they called mixed culture, which is a meso and a thermophilic, and one inoculates long life milk with using just enough to fit on the tip of a butter knife, and then uses 130 mils of this in 5 litres of milk. So basically you're making a mother culture, which you can then store. So one keeps the culture going and keeps it in the fridge for about 3 weeks and make lots and lots of cheese. So yeah, basically there's 2 different types of cultures they produce today. One's called a mother culture, where you have to make it up to breed the bacteria to a strain strong enough to inoculate your milk. And the other one is a direct set culture, which they freeze dry, and that is certainly strong enough to inoculate any milk just with the powder, and you float it on top. It rehydrates a little bit and you stir it through. Now I tend to use the freeze-dried direct set cultures. I find they're so much easier. You don't have to guess. There's no guesswork at all. So basically use that. Well, hopefully I've answered your question, Charlotte, and thanks very much for sending it in. So the next question is from Taryn, and Taryn is from somewhere in Australia. She says, "Hi Gavin, I want to make Caerphilly for the first time this weekend. The homemade cheese press project is finally finished. Should I use a MM100 or a MA11 culture? Thanks for your assistance, Taryn." Well, Taryn, let me just consult my... There's a PDF I have, which is called the Cultures Guide, and it has most of the cultures that are sold throughout the world as direct set cultures. So MA11 is made by Danisco, and it's a Choose It brand. So it has the same cultures as Sacco MO30, which is what I use. So I use MO30. So this, let me have a look. What's the bacteria names? Let me have a look. Oh my goodness. All right, Lactococcus, lactis, SSP, specific lactis, and Lactococcus lactis cremoris. So those two strains of bacteria make up, so those 2 cultures, direct set, so MA11 and MO30 from the 2 different suppliers, certainly are exactly the same. So for a Caerphilly, use the MA11. Hope that answers your question. So if you want to find that guide, I do have it posted on the Little Green Cheese blog, and I'll just find, where is it? Okay, if you go way back to podcast episode number 7, or go to the tag cloud on littlegreencheese.com and click on starter cultures, you'll find it there. So it's a link to a PDF called cultures.pdf, and you'll find all the different types of cultures. And if you have different brands and you find different brands in recipes and you're not sure if they're the same bacteria, then you can go to that and get a fairly good approximation on whether that culture's right for that cheese. It's a really great list. I got it from a website called Artisan Cheese Making at Home. Yeah, it's fabulous. So go there and check that out. And you can see which cultures you can substitute if you don't have the same brand as what, say, I do in the Keep Calm and Make Cheese ebook. So hopefully that's answered your question. Thanks very much, Taryn. So the next question is from Frieda, who had a question last week, I think, or the week before. She says, "Hi, Gavin. Thanks for your help the other day. I used a ricotta." I thought she was trying to make feta. So she made ricotta into cheesecake tarts. She found the recipe in the latest edition of the Donna Hay magazine, and it was beautiful. So she has a question around blue cheese. So she made a round of blue and put a little extra cream in it when making. After aging in the fridge, it started to go really soft on the outside and a little pink. So I scraped it off and salted it. Everything is going fine. Decided to cut it yesterday, virtually no blue inside, because I think I think my holes were not big enough, but tasted great. In fact, it was probably a little bit too salty. She was wondering if the softness and pinkish tinge on the outside was normal. How do you get it nice and brownish outside? Basically, that occasionally you do get that pink mould, and it's a form of Brevibacterium liens, which is an orange pinky sort of mould. Just scrape it off as you've done, and you can let it grow. You pierce the blue cheese again. So pierce it again. Open up those oxygen pathways for the Penicillium roqueforti to do its magic and turn the blue veins through the cheese for you. And it'll brown up nicely or grey up, depends on the surface of the cheese and the type of Penicillium roqueforti you used. There are strong moulds and medium strength moulds. I sell both of them on at Little Green Workshops. So I've used both of them. I prefer the medium one, or mild, which is certainly not as strong and does produce the blue cheese flavour, but not as many blue veins. You have to pierce it for a second time if you're going to use that. So hopefully that helps. Oh, no, there's another question from Frieda as well. She says, Camembert is too moist. The mould looks great on the outside, but flipped it and it's still wet on the underside. My mum, which is the stinky cheese expert, says it smells fine. I'm having draining issues. You really do have to elevate it. So I use bamboo mats so I stack 2 or 3 bamboo mats on top of each other and put the camemberts into a maturation box, which is just a Tupperware box. Easy enough. And make sure it's drained. And when it starts to grow its fuzz, then turn it over. It shouldn't be wet on the bottom because it stops the mould, the white mould, Penicillium candidum, and the Geotrichum candidum from growing. So make sure they're not too moist on the bottom, but they should be all right. So just stack them up on a few bamboo mats and you should have no problems at all. So hopefully, Frieda, that's helped out. And thanks for your question. So the next question, this last one, is from somebody who's been on the show before. This is Colin Giddy. Colin Giddy was in episode, I think it was 39. You have to go back and check. So he says, hi, Gavin, I thought I'd share a little experiment I'm doing at the moment. Today I made another batch of Camembert, which is, it says 6 big fat Camembert cheeses out of 8 litres of fresh milk from the cow, which is unpasteurised. But this time I put a sprinkle of herbs in each mould between each spoonful of curd that I put in. In the second batch, he put sage, and in another he put dried chives, and the others he put thyme, and left 2 without anything at all. Now he's going to wait and see what they turn out like. Sounds fantastic, Colin. I think you might have struck on something. We'll see if the runny middle still forms. That may be a bit of an issue, but tell me how they turn out. Sounds fantastic. Now, he's also mentioned that he's been making Gouda and farmhouse cheddar with chili, basil and garlic, and they're turning out awesome. He just wishes he was allowed to sell them. He also mentions that we now have a cheese fridge with so much cheese in it that he has to start to give it away to make room. This hobby's turning into a bit of a monster. Anyway, it's all good for brownie points all round. I think he does a bit of swapping cheese for other things. Now, he does have a question in here. Here it is. Can I put chopped onion in a cheese, or is it... Oh, I'll start again. Can I put chopped onion in a cheese as is, or do I have to boil it for 15 minutes or so? If I boil it, will it lose its crunchiness and go limp? It's the crunchy taste explosion that I'm looking for in the cheese. Onion powder doesn't have the same kick. Like garlic powder is not as good as garlic granules. They swell up nicely when you boil them. My journey has led me to adding extra flavour to my cheeses. Cheers for now, Colin Giddy from New Zealand. Well, Colin, what I do when I make a Cotswold is that I use dried onion flakes, and I find that they swell up in the cheese as well and have a lovely texture to the cheese. Not only do I put onion flakes, but I also put dried chives. And that makes a fairly authentic Cotswold-style cheese. And yeah, when I do cut into it, you do find nice plump pieces of onion in the cheese. And yeah, it does impart quite a nice flavour. Certainly my English-born wife, Kim, she loves it. Absolutely can't get enough of Cotswold because it reminds her of some of the ploughman lunch-type cheeses that she used to get over in the UK. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if I'd put raw onions because, and even boiling them would make them go limp anyway. So I would think that dried onions is probably your solution. So give that a go, Colin, and hope to hear from you soon about your Camemberts and how they all turned out. That's fantastic. So we've got one just last little voicemail. It's not a question or anything like that, but it's from Annie, and I think Annie's from New Zealand by the accent, but we'll just play that now.
Gavin, I love littlegreencheese.com. You have really got me hooked on a whole new way of doing things. I've done 4 of your recipes, and I'll be heading through more. I've yet to make a hard cheese, but I'm keen to keep going.
Well, thanks, Annie. I appreciate that. I think it's more of a testimonial than anything else, isn't it? But that's fantastic. I'm so glad you like the site. I'm so glad you're getting some benefit, as are all the other curd nerds out there, getting some benefit out of littlegreencheese.com. It's a passion of mine, just to share all this information for nothing, basically, and sharing it all out there for anybody out there, any curd nerds or newbie curd nerds, or even older curd nerds, to gain some experience and try some new recipes if they haven't found some already. I've been going through some of my older cheese books and putting some time aside to write the recipes down. These are really old. These are ones I've found in op shops or charity shops, in their disused books way at the back. I found a couple of really old cheese books that I'm going to find some pretty authentic old English style cheese recipes, probably ones that aren't made anymore. But I'm going to be trying to make those before, obviously, I video them and put them up onto YouTube, and I'll share the outcome here on the Little Green Cheese podcast. But thank you very much, Annie. I love your work, and thanks for trying out some of those recipes and making a go of making cheese at home. Now, don't forget, if you want to leave a listener question, then pop over to littlegreencheese.com. There's a contact form there, so contact us and just leave your question there. Or otherwise, don't forget that you can leave a voicemail if you pop over to littlegreencheese.com. In the show notes, I will leave the speak pipe widget. All you have to do is just click on there, record away, make sure you play it back so you can hear it. I've actually had a couple of voicemails in the last week where I didn't hear anything. It went for about a minute, but there was nothing there. So just make sure you play it back before you then hit the send button. Thanks very much. For upcoming workshop dates and recipes, you can find those all over at littlegreencheese.com. Don't forget, you can pick up my ebook, Keep Calm and Make Cheese, The Beginner's Guide to Cheese Making at Home. That's over on the cheese ebook tab of Little Green Cheese. That's available in all formats, and all good ebook retailers. You can also find all of my cheese making video tutorials on littlegreencheese.com. Just check out the cheese videos tab. Thanks for listening, curd nerds, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Little Green Cheese podcast. Don't forget, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you can pick up supplies, equipment and kits at littlegreenworkshops.com.au. During this podcast, you heard royalty-free music by Kevin MacLeod. I played Malt Shop Bop, News Theme and Call to the Dairy Cows. See you, curd nerds.